When I was 16, I wrote letters to my future husband. It started as a joke. I was the kind of girl who scribbled love quotes in the margins of my notebooks and daydreamed about grand romances while pretending I was far too practical for such things. My best friend at the time dared me one night at a sleepover. Why don't you just write to him? Whoever he turns out to be, pretend you're already married. So I did. Dear future husband, I don't know who you are. I don't even know if you like pineapple on pizza, but I do. So if you don't, we might already be doomed. I remember giggling so hard after writing that line that I nearly spilled soda on the paper. It was silly, immature, but also secretly comforting. Every letter I wrote was sealed, addressed only with, "To my future husband," and tucked into an old shoebox I kept under my bed. By the time I turned 18, I had written more than 30. Some were playful and ridiculous. Some were deeply personal, written after a fight with my parents or after a heartbreak when I needed to believe someone out there was waiting for me, someone who would understand. I poured pieces of myself into those envelopes, never really believing they'd matter. Years passed, and like most childhood quirks, the letters became a memory. I grew up. I went to college, got my degree, started working in publishing. My life was stable, busy, and ordinary in the way adulthood often is. I had my share of relationships, but none of them ever felt like the epic kind of love I secretly dreamed about when I was younger. Still, I told myself that was fine. Love in movies was scripted. Real life was different. I hadn't thought about those letters in nearly a decade, until the day one showed up in my mailbox. It was a Friday evening. I'd had one of those weeks where everything seemed to go wrong. Missed deadlines, spilled coffee, and a boss who seemed determined to remind me of every mistake I'd ever made. All I wanted was to curl up on the couch with takeout and forget the world. That's when I saw the envelope. At first I thought it was junk mail, but my name wasn't typed out by a machine. It was handwritten in neat looping script that looked oddly familiar. My stomach gave a strange little flip. I opened it. Inside was one of my own letters. Dear future husband, I'm writing this after failing my driver's test again. If you're reading this, please don't ever let our kids laugh at me for being a terrible parallel parker. I swear it's not my fault. The cars move when I get close. They know I'm scared and they're mocking me. I froze. My handwriting, my silly teenage voice. The memory of sitting at my desk, scrawling out those words while chewing on a candy bar, came rushing back so vividly it almost hurt. But that wasn't the strangest part. Someone had signed the bottom. See you soon, your future husband. My heart stumbled in my chest. I stared at the signature, which wasn't a name, just the phrase, your future husband. I must have read it a dozen times, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was real. Someone had gotten hold of one of my old letters and sent it back to me. At first, I thought maybe it was a prank. My best friend from high school, maybe? She'd known about the letters. She could have found them somehow, but the shoebox had been lost years ago when my parents moved houses. I hadn't seen it since. A strange warmth bloomed in my chest, tangled with curiosity and a hint of something I didn't want to name: hope. The next day, another letter came. Dear future husband, I'm writing this on a rainy Sunday because I'm bored. If you're anything like me, maybe you love rainy days too. Do you ever imagine us sitting by a window with tea, just talking? No big adventures, no drama, just the quiet kind of love. The safe kind. Beneath my words again was a reply. I do imagine that, more than you know. I pressed the paper to my chest and laughed out loud, part nerves, part disbelief. It was ridiculous, impossible, romantic. Who was this? I couldn't stop thinking about it all weekend. I told myself it had to be a joke, but the replies didn't feel like jokes. They were thoughtful, kind. Whoever was writing back wasn't mocking me. They were answering. On Monday morning, another letter arrived. This time, I didn't even hesitate before tearing it open. Dear future husband, I'm writing this after my first heartbreak. He said I was too much, too emotional, too idealistic. If you're real, if you're out there, please don't ever tell me I'm too much. I want to believe there's someone who will think I'm just enough. My throat tightened as I read my own teenage vulnerability staring back at me. Beneath it, the reply, you are not too much. You are everything. I sat down on the kitchen floor, clutching the letter as though it were something fragile and holy. My 16-year-old self had been crying when she wrote that. My 28-year-old self was crying reading it. Whoever this was, they weren't just playing around. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I'd nearly given up on: magic. By the end of the week, I had received 4 letters, each one from my younger self. Each one answered. The 5th arrived on a Thursday night, and this one wasn't just answered. It came with an invitation. Dear future husband, I'm writing this before senior prom. I don't have a date. I'm pretending it doesn't matter, but it does. I know this is silly, but I keep wishing you were real, that you'd show up and ask me to dance. The reply was short. I wish I had, but maybe we can fix that. Meet me? There was an address written beneath the words, a cafe downtown. The kind I'd walked by 100 times but never gone inside. My pulse raced. My fingers trembled as I held the page. Was I really considering this? Every rational thought screamed no. This was reckless, dangerous even. What if it was some creep? What if I was being played? But another voice whispered louder. What if it's real? And so, against every piece of logic I'd ever been taught, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror on Saturday afternoon, smoothing down my hair, heart pounding as though I were 16 again and about to meet the boy of my dreams. I didn't know who would be waiting for me at that cafe, but for the first time in years, I felt alive with possibility. The second letter came 3 days later. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a water bill and a grocery store coupon flyer. At first, I almost didn't notice it. The plain white envelope looked like any other piece of mail, except it bore the same neat handwriting on the front, to my future wife. I froze, my heart stuttering the way it had when the first one came. Inside, the letter read, Dear wife, I wasn't sure if you'd write back, but thank you for your words. I can almost hear the laughter in your sentences. You said you burned your teenage letters years ago, but I don't think that's true. I think you saved them in some hidden box because the words you write now carry the same playful hope I imagine you had as a girl. Do you still believe in magic? Because I do. And maybe this is ours. Yours, future husband. I pressed the paper to my chest and sat at the kitchen table, my coffee going cold beside me. It was ridiculous, completely irrational, and yet the warmth those words sparked inside me was undeniable. By the end of the week, I caved. I wrote back. Dear future husband, I suppose I do still believe in magic, though it's harder these days. Life has a way of sanding the glitter off of things. Still, your letter made me smile in a way I haven't in a long time. If you really are him, the man I wrote to all those years ago, then you know my heart better than most people ever will. But just so you know, I'm older now, a little scarred, and sometimes more tired than hopeful. If you're still willing to keep writing, maybe I'll keep answering. Sincerely, your skeptical almost wife. I slipped the letter into the mailbox before I could change my mind. The exchange became a rhythm, a quiet tether woven through the days. Sometimes his letters were lighthearted, jokes about cooking disasters, witty observations about neighbors, playful teases about how I always signed my name like a teenager trying to sound clever. Other times, they were intimate in ways that startled me. He wrote about loneliness, about the fear of not being enough, about how sometimes he wondered if love was real outside of movies. But then I read your words, he once confessed, and I think, maybe it is. I found myself confiding too. I told him about my job, about how the office lights buzzed like 1,000 bees, about the ache of waking up alone on Sundays, about my parents' constant questions. When will you settle down, Emma? I told him how writing to him made me feel less alone. Weeks passed, then months. Every few days another letter arrived. Each time I saw that familiar handwriting, my heart leapt like a schoolgirl's. My best friend, Claire, noticed the change in me. You've been smiling at nothing lately, she accused one evening over wine. Have I? I tried to play it off, but my cheeks betrayed me. Claire narrowed her eyes. Oh my God, you're seeing someone, aren't you? Not exactly. I told her everything. About the teenage letters, about the mysterious responses, about how much they'd come to mean to me. She nearly choked on her wine. Emma, that's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard, or the beginning of a very weird Netflix documentary. I laughed, but her words lingered. Was I foolish? Was I being catfished by some stranger with too much time on his hands? And yet, I couldn't stop. One rainy Thursday, I opened a letter that made my breath catch. Dear wife, sometimes I wonder if you're as real as you feel on these pages. You write about your mornings, your coffee habits, the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're thinking, but what if I'm just imagining it all? What if you're a dream I'll wake from? Still, I want to believe you're out there. Maybe closer than we both think. I'm not asking for much, just one thing. Would you ever want to meet? Yours, future husband. I sat staring at the words, my heart thundering. Meet? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. I didn't answer right away. For days, I carried the letter in my bag, rereading it on the subway, at my desk, in bed at night. Finally, I wrote back. Dear future husband, meeting is dangerous. What if we ruin the magic? What if you're not who I imagine? Worse, what if I'm not who you imagine? Still, part of me longs to know. Tell me something first. Tell me one thing about yourself you've never told anyone. Then maybe I'll be brave enough to meet you. Yours in hesitation, Emma. His reply came fast. Dear wife, all right, here it is. I once saw you, years ago. You were standing in line at a bookstore, clutching a notebook to your chest like it was treasure. You didn't see me, but I saw you. And something inside me whispered, pay attention. I didn't know why at the time. Now I do. Future husband. The letter shook in my hands. He'd seen me? In real life? 100 questions whirled in my head. Who was he? When had this happened? And why did something about his words feel familiar? That night, lying in bed, I held his letter close and whispered into the dark. Who are you? And though silence answered, I had the strangest, most certain feeling. I was about to find out. The next few weeks passed in a haze of words, ink, and expectation. Emma found herself lingering by her front door after work, her heart beating faster every time she spotted the small cream-colored envelope in her mailbox. The handwriting had become as familiar to her as her own, a script that was neat but slightly slanted, as though written by someone who couldn't quite contain all that they wanted to say. Each letter was tender, sometimes playful, often filled with reflections that felt like they had been lifted directly from her own mind. He didn't sign with just initials anymore. No, he had begun writing his full name, Ethan Cole. Emma found herself whispering it sometimes when she was alone. Ethan. The name felt gentle on her tongue, like it belonged in her world all along, waiting for her to call it. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Emma sank onto her couch with tea in hand and opened the newest envelope. Dear Emma, I don't know how to explain this without sounding strange, but your words feel like a mirror to my heart. Every letter you wrote years ago, those jokes, those daydreams, those hopeful lists, they weren't just a fantasy. They were an invitation. I only regret not answering sooner. You asked once what kind of man your future husband might be. I don't know if I can live up to that, but I want to try. Yours, Ethan. Emma pressed the letter to her chest. It was ridiculous, wasn't it? Falling for a man she'd never seen? And yet, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't even embarrassed. With Ethan, every word felt safe. Every letter felt like home. She wrote back immediately, her pen flying across the page. Dear Ethan, maybe I was only joking when I wrote those letters, but now they mean something to me too. Maybe I didn't know what I was looking for back then, but now I think I do. And maybe, just maybe, it's you. A week later, Emma met her best friend Claire for lunch. You're glowing, Claire said, squinting at her suspiciously as she sipped her latte. What's going on? Spill. Emma hesitated. Claire had always been the practical one, the voice of reason when Emma got lost in her daydreams. But she couldn't hide this, not anymore. I've been writing letters again, Emma confessed, lowering her voice. Claire frowned. Letters? Like pen pals? Not exactly. Remember those silly letters I wrote to my future husband years ago? Claire blinked. The ones you shoved in that box and forgot about? Emma nodded, smiling nervously. Someone sent them back to me, signed, and now we've been writing back and forth. Claire set her cup down a little too hard. Emma, do you even know this guy? What if it's some scammer or worse? It's not like that, Emma protested, her voice soft but steady. He knows things, Claire, little details I wrote years ago, things no one else would know. And his words, they're kind. They're real. Claire sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Just promise me you'll be careful. Sometimes words can trick us into believing something that isn't there. Emma nodded, though she already knew in her heart Ethan was real. The next letter from Ethan was different, longer, heavier. Dear Emma, there's something I haven't told you, something I've been scared to admit. When I first found your letters, I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe it was fate or maybe it was a mistake, but I couldn't let them go. You wrote about wanting someone who saw you, not the surface version of you, but the real you. And the truth is, I already did. I've known you for years, Emma. From a distance, quietly. I wasn't supposed to find those letters, but when I did, I couldn't stop myself. I had to answer. If this changes how you feel, I'll understand. But I couldn't keep writing to you and hiding this anymore. Yours, Ethan. Emma's hands shook as she lowered the paper. He'd known her? All this time, her mind raced. Who could it be? A colleague? A neighbor? Someone from her past? The mystery that had once felt charming now filled her with both anticipation and a quiet fear. Days later, Emma stood outside the little bookstore downtown. Ethan had asked her to meet him there, if she wanted. Her heart hammered as she pushed open the glass door. The scent of paper and ink enveloped her, comforting and familiar. She scanned the room, her pulse quickening with every second, and then she saw him. He stood by the poetry section, a book in his hands. His hair was dark, slightly tousled, his build lean but strong. He looked up at her, and the moment their eyes met, Emma knew. It wasn't the kind of knowing that came from recognition. No, it was deeper than that. Like her heart had already been waiting for this face, these eyes, this smile. Emma? He asked softly, his voice exactly as she had imagined it through his words. Warm, steady, familiar. Yes, she breathed. Ethan. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the silence filled with the weight of every letter, every word they had shared. Then Ethan smiled, tentative but real. Hi, Emma laughed, the sound breaking free like sunlight through clouds. Hi. They sat together in the cafe corner of the bookstore, 2 steaming mugs between them. Conversation flowed easily, almost too easily, as though they had been speaking for years and had only paused for breath. I can't believe it's you, Emma said, shaking her head. All this time, you knew me? Ethan nodded, his expression earnest. We went to the same high school, though we never really talked. Later, I saw you around town a few times. You always seemed untouchable, like you belonged in a world just out of reach. And then one day I came across those letters. At first, I thought maybe I shouldn't read them, but then I couldn't stop, and I realized you weren't untouchable at all. You were real, and you were everything I'd been looking for. Emma's eyes stung with unshed tears. So you just started writing back? I thought about it for months, Ethan admitted. I was terrified you'd think I was crazy, but I couldn't let you go without trying. Emma reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. I'm glad you did. As the evening light slanted through the cafe windows, Ethan pulled something from his bag. It was a small, worn envelope. The very first letter Emma had ever written. I kept this one, he said, sliding it toward her. The one where you joked about how your future husband better like rainy days and bad singing in the car. Emma laughed through the tears that slipped down her cheeks. That was the silliest one of all. It was my favorite, Ethan said softly, because it felt like you were already talking to me. Emma covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Every letter, every word, every hope she had scribbled in her youth had somehow led her here, to this moment, to this man. And for the first time in years, she believed in forever. The weeks following their first meeting passed like a dream. Emma never wanted to end. Ethan and Emma spent hours wandering the city together, laughing at small cafes, sharing secrets on park benches, and stealing quiet moments on bridges where the sun spilled gold over the water. Every conversation was easy, yet every glance felt electric, as if their hearts had been writing to each other long before they ever met. Evenings were spent exchanging letters. Now, though, the letters weren't a secret. They were an extension of their relationship. They laughed together over past teenage confessions and shared hopes for the future, the ink bridging the gap between past dreams and present reality. But life, as it always does, whispered a reminder that reality couldn't be perfect forever. One rainy afternoon, Emma arrived at Ethan's apartment to find him pacing the living room, a rare frown creasing his forehead. Something wrong? She asked, concern tugging at her voice. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I have to leave town for work. 2 weeks, unavoidable. Emma's chest sank. She wanted to protest, to insist he stay, but she knew better. Where? She asked softly. Boston. There's a client that... It's complicated. I don't have a choice. She nodded, though the fear in her chest twisted. 2 weeks apart felt like forever. Especially now, when everything between them was so fragile, so new. I'll write to you every day, she promised. I'll write back, he said, his fingers brushing hers. It won't feel like forever. They hugged, a long embrace that left them both trembling. And then he was gone. 2 weeks turned into 10 days, 10 days into 2 weeks, and still, their letters continued. Emma woke each morning to a note slipped under her apartment door or arriving in her mailbox, the familiar handwriting making her heart sore. Dear Emma, I walked past that little park today where we first laughed about your old letters. I could almost hear your voice. I wish you were here. But for now, I'll live in these words. I'll count each one as a moment with you. Her replies mirrored his devotion. Dear Ethan, I visited the cafe where we first met. It felt empty without you, but when I held your letters, it was like you were sitting across from me. I can't wait for you to come home. The letters became their lifeline, their way of keeping love alive across distance. Every day, Emma felt the connection grow, the intimacy deepen. But as the final days of his trip approached, Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. A quiet voice whispered doubts. What if this only exists on paper? What if the moment you see him again, it all feels different? She didn't want to admit it, but fear made her restless. On the last night, she sat by the window, pen poised over her notebook. Words spilled out, honest and raw. Dear Ethan, I'm afraid. Afraid that the magic of letters won't survive the real world. Afraid that when I see you again, it will be ordinary. But I have to believe. I have to trust that what we've built on paper can live in the sun, in the rain, in the quiet moments between breaths. I hope you feel the same. The reply came the next morning, just before he returned. Dear Emma, I've been afraid too, but the truth is, letters aren't magic. You are. You're the reason the words matter, the reason I keep writing. And when I see you again, I don't want ordinary. I want you. Everything, in every way I can. Emma arrived at the little pier by Willow Lake. The same place Ethan had asked her to meet the first time, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. Rain threatened, light and soft, misting over the water. And then she saw him. Ethan stood there, holding something in his hand, a bouquet of wildflowers, colorful and slightly untamed, just like her imagination. He looked at her, eyes warm, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt all her fear dissolve. Emma, he breathed as she closed the distance between them. Ethan, she replied, smiling through tears. They laughed, the sound mingling with the rain, and then he took her hands, holding them gently but firmly. I promised you letters, he said, but I think I'd rather live this story with you in person from now on. Emma nodded, unable to speak, her heart too full. They walked along the pier, the rain soaking through their coats, but neither of them cared. Ethan pulled a folded envelope from his pocket, holding it out to her. One last letter, he said. Emma opened it. Dear Emma, we've traveled a long way in words, haven't we? But now it's time for actions. I promise to keep loving you in letters, in whispers, in laughter, in tears. But most of all, I promise to love you in the days and nights we share. Will you let me? Emma looked up at him, tears spilling freely now. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Ethan smiled, leaning forward to press his lips to hers. The rain fell around them like a blessing, and in that instant, the years of letters, dreams, and longings crystallized into something real, something tangible, something beautiful. In the weeks and months that followed, their love flourished. The letters never stopped, even though they now exchanged them in addition to phone calls, texts, and long evenings wrapped in each other's arms. Each note became a reminder of the magic they had found together, a bridge between past and present, imagination and reality. Emma often thought back to her teenage self, scribbling silly hopes in a shoebox. She smiled at the thought of that young girl, naive, hopeful, dreaming. That girl had known something she didn't. Love waits. Sometimes in letters, sometimes in chance encounters, sometimes in the quiet patience of someone paying attention, across years. Ethan became more than just her mystery correspondent. He became her best friend, her confidant, the keeper of her dreams. And Emma, for her part, became the woman who could finally say she had found exactly what she had written for: a love built on words, promises, and patience. One sunny afternoon, a few years later, Emma and Ethan visited the old bookstore where they had first met. They carried a small wooden box. Inside were all the letters Emma had written years ago, and all the letters Ethan had written back. "I thought we should keep them together," Ethan said, placing them carefully in the box. "All the words that led us here." Emma smiled, her heart full. "It's perfect," she said softly. And for the first time, she realized something profound. Love had begun as a joke, had grown in ink and paper, and had become a life they would write together, day by day, moment by moment. Hand in hand, hearts intertwined, Emma and Ethan walked out into the sunlight. Their story, once imagined on paper, had become reality. Romantic, enduring, and entirely theirs.